like old day, wishing me heart it was Sunday, drinking wine and beer all the week, time for whiskey on a Sunday.
Hello everyone and Happy New Year. You are all very welcome to this special episode of Whiskey on a Sunday with me, Sam for All. Now, as many of you know, since I launched this new series on Instagram Live, Sunday evenings, 8 p.m. EST is when it airs. So since I've launched it, I've been focused on talking about Irish whiskey. See, to me, it makes perfect sense to have started with Irish whiskey as, well, the Irish pretty much invented whiskey. And I talk a lot more about that in episode 1. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can find it on YouTube or on IGTV. Just search for Sam for All. So aside from me talking all the time, I thought it would be both fun and maybe helpful. Right, puppy? Thought it would be fun and helpful to my viewers to get insights and thoughts from everyday Irish whiskey drinkers. And so with this in mind, I assembled a panel of 6 Irish whiskey enthusiasts. The panel ranged from the novice right through to the more seasoned. I'm very lucky to have been able to include both my father-in-law, Ron, whom you'll meet in the subsequent video, as well as my Belfast-born dad, Joe. I was also very fortunate to be able to include Irish enthusiasts from 4 US states, friends that my wife and I met and made on what has now become known as the legendary 2018 Larry Kerwin Tour of Ireland. Now, Larry Kerwin, originally from Wexford, is a respected musician, poet, author, and playwright, perhaps most famously known for being one of the founding members of Irish-American rock band Black 47, and or for his weekly radio show Celtic Crush, which broadcasts live on Sirius XM channel 710 each Sunday morning. So each year, Larry invites people to join him for a week-long tour of Ireland, and it's filled with music, with history, some incredible insights, and of course, good crack. So Tom, Aaron, Doug, and Lenny, whom we met on that tour, join me in this video panel from states like Upper State New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New Jersey. So I thought it would be a good idea to start off our group chat by asking folks about what whiskey, if any, that they had poured in anticipation of our discussion. As usual, my dad did not disappoint in showcasing both his Irish wit and Irish humor. What's in your glass, Dad?
Well, I don't have a glass actually, but I was scrambling a bit because I didn't check my emails, as you know. But I knew that I had a Bushmills and a Jameson's from my last couple of get-togethers here at the house with Tony, who is a very nice, easygoing, interesting character, 86 years old, loves his Irish whiskey. And I went to my cabinet where I keep my whiskey, and I couldn't remember where I left those bottles, and now I remember I left them in the recycling bin.
Good visit with Tony. I've got a dram here. I went in honor of Irish whiskey and in honor of both Celtic Crush and Mr. Varley and Mr. Sajak. I went with the Pogues Irish whiskey. Because for those of you that don't know, Aaron and Tom have both been a part of the Pogestra videos that have gone on. If you haven't checked those out, go on to YouTube, put in Pogestra. And I think Aaron's been in more than one. And I know Tom and Aaron have been in one. So I figured that would be a little apropos to go with the Pogues. Have you guys had this? Has anyone had this?
Yes.
What do you guys think?
I really wanted to like it.
Okay.
I really wanted to like it. It was different. To me, it had a real hard bite to it.
Okay.
Which was more, I'm wanting something a little smoother. Jameson's usually my go-to. He's just like everybody else. But to me, it was a little too aggressive. Kind of like the Proper 12 is that way too. It's just, right. It's a real bitey type of whiskey.
Very good.
Yeah, one ice cube makes it a little bit better.
I can believe that.
Very good. And that's the important thing. I personally, I like it. And that's the beauty of it all. Everybody's palate is different. It also, things that play into it is your mood and what you've had to eat before or to drink before. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you like it, great. And if you don't, that's okay too. There's really nothing wrong with saying you don't enjoy something.
My dad, ladies and gentlemen, my dad, Joe. What a character. Okay, so I next asked the group to share what it was that first drew them to Irish whiskey and or what their introduction to Irish whiskey was, as well as asking them to share what keeps them intrigued by it. Aaron from Pennsylvania starts off with some great advice for what not to do with Irish whiskey, with my father-in-law Ron sharing, well, let's call it his Irish whiskey baptism.
That's what you do with that. And the Irish whiskeys, I always felt were something that you don't shoot. You sip on them. They just kind of taste good and they feel good. They make you feel, that sort of thing. And it never fails. When I put a bottle of that out, everybody comes. Like people want to come in. Hey, yeah, let's have a toast. Let's have a drink. And you sit and you talk and you chat. And that's kind of what I like about it. The incredible, there's like so many of them now that are available. I mean, it used to be Bushmills, Jamesons, and then like down. But now there's just all sorts of cool ones. It seems like I'm always trying to find something different and it's out there. So that's fun.
I want to ask my dad, I know you left Belfast when you were young, but do you recall whiskey being a part of the family social fabric in Belfast before you emigrated? And if and what drew you to have it outside of being told you're Irish and you should drink whiskey?
I think myself, I started drinking when I went back to Ireland. We were here and I was 8 years old and went back at 17, 18. And then Irish whiskey, that's what people were ordering. You went into the pubs and everybody was having Irish whiskey. And then relatives and friends from there came to Canada. They brought Irish whiskey. They didn't bring Scotch whiskey. They all brought Irish whiskey. And then it started to create a pattern where if you went there, you might as well go to the duty free and pick up some Irish whiskey for these guys because they're bringing it to you when they come to see you. So I think that's how it started.
Lenny, what got you into Irish whiskey, and if you don't mind sharing, and what's keeping you with Irish whiskey?
I'm not really sure how I got started. I guess it started with Jameson, and I thought that was it. And then some Canadian guy in 2018 steered me in a different direction with Napog Castle, right?
Napog, yes.
Yeah. And then it's just been, I don't know, we've been meandering around. There's just so much selection and so many things to try. Tom and I spent an afternoon at the Dead Rabbit in New York City behind that wall of whiskey. And that's just mind-boggling.
Tom, how did you get started with Irish whiskey, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, first off, let's establish the fact that I like to drink.
There is that too.
Yes, there's that too. It was funny when I first started dabbling in liqueur, the harder stuff. My Irish coffees had to have Bushmills. It was the only thing that I would allow to have. But I never was much of a straight whiskey drinker until a few years ago when I started, like everybody else, Jameson, sort of the gateway drug to great Irish whiskeys. That's where you start. But what really cemented it was a Tuesday night in Killarney, where, believe it or not, I'd had too much Guinness to drink and I needed a change. And I looked down, at the bar, and it has Jameson, ginger, and lime. And I said, sounds good. I like ginger. I mean, I've had enough whiskey and gingers with Canadian whiskey in my day. So I had it, and not only was it refreshing, it was rejuvenating. And that sort of made me think, boy, this is good stuff. So I started experimenting. Lenny has told of the afternoon of debauchery at the Dead Rabbit, where we basically stood the bar for 3 hours and sipped great Irish whiskeys, including this with the Clonakilty. And now it's just learning more about the history, the knowledge, being a Jack Daniel's fan. I know about their distilling. So it's just learning more and more about, a really good thing.
So Ron, I know being Canadian and of Scottish extraction, there's, whiskey and Canadian whiskey and Scottish whiskey probably played a larger part of your foray into whiskey when you were a younger man. But when did you get into Irish whiskey, or when did you become open or discover Irish whiskey? Was it something relatively soon?
I
Relatively.
became aware of Irish whiskey when I met my future wife and her family.
There you go. Yeah, that'll do that to you.
And yeah, and it was like, get to meet him, and it was typical, what are you going to have to drink? Well, I'll just have a beer. And they'd have a beer, and they'd bring a shot of Irish whiskey out. Normally it was Jameson. Occasionally it'd be the Bushnell, but mostly it was Jameson. And I just got hooked onto it then.
So, great stuff, great people. Okay, so now with more and more Irish whiskey brands appearing seemingly all the time, and with most of them not yet able to cultivate and produce their own whiskey, which means, essentially that these brands are buying stock from more established distilleries, at least until they can get up and running with able to produce their own spirit. I wanted to know and ask the panel how important it is for a brand to produce their own whiskey, if important at all, as well as what the panel thought the most important aspect of Irish whiskey is. Here's what they had to say.
Well, for me personally, my driver is the taste.
Okay.
You could put, as far as I'm concerned, you could put 3 glasses in front of me, not label them, and I'll just tell you which one I prefer, and you tell me after which one it is. That type of thing and whatnot. That's Irish whiskey. Straight whiskey and Scotch, it's a different story. But
good. Okay. I see Aaron Varley nodding along. Aaron, do you
I agree.
care where it comes from, or is it just what it tastes like and how you enjoy it?
It's the taste. It's my wife will tell you it's how cool the bottle looks, and then the taste. So it's both. It's packaging and it's flavor, and it's true too. Like I'll find myself, you look and you say, I've never seen this one before. I'm buying it, just because I want to try it, just because of the excitement too. And then it's a good conversation piece. That's why we keep them here and say exactly.
That's what suckered me in off the top.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? Exactly. Lenny, do you care? Clonakilty, I know you like them. Now they're bonders. They don't even really make whiskey.
They're extremely new.
So their stock is not their own. I mean, they're using someone else's stock and then they're playing with it. But you seem to like it. So do you care that they didn't cultivate it?
No, I go by the taste. And if you can get in on the ground, like this Drum Chambeau, you had to wait for this to come out. They got their gin out. They were making a living off of that, and then you just wait around, and eventually, their casks become aged, and it's out on the street.
Exactly.
There's a bonder up in Coula Clare, Chapel Gate Whiskey Company.
Chapel Gate.
They don't distill. They're just a bonder. They take old casks and they mix it, and they have a wonderful product also. So you go by the taste.
Very good. Doug, do you care where it was sourced from, or do you care how it tastes at the end result?
I was sort of surprised when I was reading the Dead Rabbit book about that going on. You're reading that book and you realize some of these distilleries are too new to have their own. But then Teeling, they actually, the company they owned or operated before, they took some of those kegs or cask and brought them with them and used those to make their initial batches. And I think Teeling's reaching about 15 years now, where I think some of their stuff is starting to be their own, distillery.
You're absolutely correct.
It did bother me a little bit at first, but again, it's taste. It's a good tasting drink.
I think taste is more important to me, but I was wondering what you thought about, is it necessarily, if it's more expensive, is it better?
That's a good one. I'm going to ask Tom what his thoughts on whether he cares or not, and then I'll circle back to that question. So that's a good question. Tom, do you care? If they've distilled it themselves, or do you care more about what it tastes like at the end?
Taste is king, but what I'm more interested in is perhaps the history of the distillers and the originators of these newer ones. Are they just, for lack of a better term, a trust fund baby who had a few million euro and decided to start a distillery? Or are they individuals who have a history in the Irish whiskey business? That will drive me to their product probably more.
Okay.
Is like, if it's a family or if they've spun off another, famous house.
Okay.
That'll make me more interested in the product. But then you try it, and if you like it, you drink it, and if not, you know not to go back there.
So history, yeah. I mean, with
Yeah.
with whiskeys in general, there's usually a good story there. But you're right, with the newer ones that we're seeing pop up, some of them just are people that made their money somewhere else and want to jump onto something trendy. Now, good question my father asked: is the more expensive ones better? In my opinion, and it's just my opinion, that's a completely subjective thing. Obviously, with whether it's Irish whiskey or Scotch, or whether it's American, bourbon or what have you, or Canadian whiskey, the longer it ages, typically the more expensive it is, because the distillery hasn't been making any money while it's sitting in a cask. So there's a component to that, and generally, and again I have to say generally, when a whiskey is sitting in a cask, the longer it sits, the more harmonious the flavors can all kind of play with each other. The more wood influence it can get, it usually gets more mellow. But that being said, that's under the assumption that the whiskey was well balanced and well made before it went into the cask. So I wouldn't suggest to a novice to say that spend $80 or $100 on a bottle of whiskey and you'll love it versus spending 30 or 40. I really think it comes down to you like what you like.
Some very good insights there. With all that in mind, I next wanted to know what the group thought about the advent of what I'm going to call a non-traditional approach to Irish whiskey that we're starting to see a bit more and more. Releases like Jameson's new coffee-infused cold brew and things like that.
But what about these new things that are coming out now, like this cold brew Jameson? I haven't had it yet. I'll be honest, I shouldn't be, but I'm a little skeptical because I find Irish whiskeys are very light on the palate to begin with, and I'm afraid the coffee is going to overpower it. But for those of you that have had it, what's it like? And to the group, do you like when Jameson and other distilleries go off into these adjuncts and age in IPA barrels or add coffee notes or do different things, or would you prefer that they stayed more whiskey focused?
Well, my response would be, I'm old. I prefer tradition.
Okay.
I don't like any of these like fruity drinks or where they start playing with the mixes and stuff like that, bottles. But that's just me. It could be completely different for everybody else.
Fair enough. Dad, what do you think? You're of the older generation. Do you care that do you care that they're putting coffee and cinnamon and different things in whiskey, or do you find it interesting, or do you just not care? Period.
No, I find it interesting, but sometimes, like Ron was saying, the traditional whiskey is what you really are familiar with, and it's what brings you back to the table to order another one, kind of thing.
Okay. No, good point. Now, Aaron, I know you're waving it, and Tom, you knew what it was, so I'll throw to you two gentlemen. And again, there's no bad answers, there's no wrong answers. But what do you guys think? You've obviously tried it. Did you like it? And would you like to see more of those type of things to push the envelope on the whiskeys, or would you rather them go back and just stick to what they're known for?
Well, I can go buy the stuff they're known for, so it's kind of fun with the coffee one. The Caskmates ones, the ones with the IPA cask and the stout cask and that didn't really do it for me. But the coffee one, it's just a hint. It's just enough. And if you stick it in the refrigerator, and then on a summer day or something, you want to just something different and refreshing, you pour a little bit of that cold out of the refrigerator. It's kind of nice, especially when you're quarantined all day. It gives you that little bit of something.
Very good. Tom, your thoughts on?
Well, I've had all three of them, and the one thing that I like, especially with the stout Jamesons, is that it's not really flavored. It's more aromatic. You smell more the creaminess of a stout in it, so that's good. But if I want a Jameson's, I'll have an original Jameson's. It's a nice, it's like the beer companies going into seltzer. It's like good for you, but if I want a beer, I want a beer.
Yeah.
If I want a whiskey, I'll drink a whiskey. It's nice, but it's not on my shelf right now.
Very good. Doug,
It's not bad.
have you tried any of those flavored, what I'm going to call flavored whiskeys or improvised whiskeys? And if so, what are your thoughts on them?
I have a bottle of the cold brew, and I again like Aaron said, I like it's the coffee doesn't overwhelm it. It's
Okay.
one thing I did, and I've had it twice now, is actually they were talking about mixing with Coca-Cola, which but I actually mixed it with Dr. Pepper. I thought that would be an interesting way to play it. It actually tastes pretty good.
Wow.
Okay.
So I'll mix one of those and drink it, and it seems pretty good.
Very good. Very good. Lenny, we'll circle back to New Jersey. What do you think about
Yeah, I
whiskeys like
haven't
that?
tried any of those. I'm new at this whiskey stuff, so I'm working on the traditional stuff. I'll get there eventually, maybe. But there's such a selection of the traditional stuff. I'll stick with that.
So throughout the chat, there seems that, at least for this group, that there's really only one key aspect in Irish whiskey that they're interested in, and it is?
I mean, overwhelmingly, it seems like taste is the underlying factor for this group. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of where I'm going with this. A lot of these articles that are written about whiskeys and a lot of these shows and a lot of these podcasts and people talking about it, this, in my opinion, are putting way too much importance on the marketing aspects and in talking about what you should be drinking and really not asking the question, do you like what you're drinking or do you like what's available? So that's why I wanted to do this type of group discussion, just to see from folks that are, from novice, Lenny's pretty much self-described novice whiskey drinker coming along, but he's doing well. He's gaining by leaps and bounds every week. To some of the more to the more experienced palates, folks like my dad or folks like Tom and Ron and Aaron. Just wanted to see what your thoughts were on some of these topics. And seemingly taste seems to be the main, the main importance. Would I be wrong with that, guys, or have I missed something?
No, I don't think so. I think that's the way I understood what I was hearing from the group.
Towards the end of our chat, I shared some news about a new, soon-to-be-released Irish whiskey, which will sport a, let's call it, iconic Belfast name. And it also has ties to my own family. Well, the brand name is going to have some ties to my own family, and here's my dad to explain just exactly what that is.
Titanic Whiskey is coming out. They're going to make a whiskey called Titanic. The thought is, hopefully it goes down easy.
Funny, I thought you were going to say something like that.
So it's funny. I mentioned, but there is a whiskey called Titanic coming out, and again, I think so. Who was it that said about the trust fund babies? Tom, was it you that mentioned if it's a trust fund baby making whiskey, you're not so excited? That's kind of what this guy is. He's not really tied to the whiskey history. He's just an entrepreneur with some cash that kind of wants to cash in, I guess, on the Titanic craze. Dad, would you buy that? I know we've got a family tie, or one of your grandparents or great grandparents had a tie to the Titanic. What did he do again on the?
Well, the story. My mother always said he was a carpenter, and we watched a movie there with Hollywood with DiCaprio and Kate Winslet or whatever, and thinking he might be part of all the staircases. But anyways, I used to tell people he was in charge of iceberg detectors, so that was my joke. But then my aunt came over, and she was older than my mother by 10 years, and I said, so your father worked on he was a carpenter? And she said, no, he wasn't a carpenter, he was a steel riveter. And I said, Jesus, he did sink the ship after all. But strangely enough, last comment on that was he was supposed to go on the maiden voyage because he was one of the best workers or whatever. And he had some heart issues and he didn't go. And sadly, he died like a few months later from a heart attack. So he would have died on the Titanic. Yeah, so we do have a history of the Titanic. So sorry, Paul, but you're part of that. I have to reel you in, man.
Hey, I can sink a glass of whiskey, not a problem. So
there you go.
I guess it lives on.
So would I buy Titanic whiskey? Yeah.
All righty then. So now we all know what really caused that boat to sink. Okay. So being born in Belfast and of course the resident Irishman on the panel, I turned to my father for some parting advice that he would give to someone who would like to try Irish whiskey for the very first time. Dad, what would you say to someone that's intrigued by Irish whiskey, to say, I like drinking Jack, or maybe I drink Johnny Walker or whatever, but I keep hearing about Irish whiskey. I want to try it. What words of advice would you have for them?
Have a designated driver.
Yes. Social responsibility at top part of the list. Absolutely.
Because sometimes if you have Irish whiskey, you think some people are not familiar at all with whiskeys in general would tend to think it's like a beer. Oh, I only had 3, but 3 beers, 3 Budweisers is not the same as 3 whiskeys. And then what Aaron was saying, take your time. Make sure you're not rushing. You don't have to be in another place 15 minutes later and you just sit down, you just chug it and say, yeah, it's not bad, man. I don't like it. Either way, it's not really fair to the whiskey because you have to give it some time to realize if you really like it or not. I think that's what it is.
Well, there you go. Some sage advice from my dear old dad himself. And that, folks, that's a wrap on this special edition of Whiskey on a Sunday. Now, I would like to sincerely thank Ron, my dad Joe, Aaron, Tom, Doug, and of course Lenny for sharing their great insights and their thoughts on Irish whiskey, and also for all the laughs. In case you couldn't tell from the video, folks, we had a lot of fun doing this call. Next week, I'll be introducing my first Scottish whiskey, so be sure to tune in to my Psalm for All Instagram page at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the live presentation and live tasting. Until then, a heartfelt thank you to all of you for tuning in and for your continued interest and support. Until Sunday, be safe, be well everyone, and sláinte from Psalm for All.